Wait, that's my son? Theodore's voice cracked before he could stop it. All eyes in the auditorium turned toward him, but he wasn't looking at them. He was locked onto the stage. The young man in the tailored black suit, standing beneath the LED glow of the tech conference keynote banner, was confidently explaining how his company had just acquired the nation's top logistics firm. Theodore's family's rival. The room erupted with applause, but he was frozen because the CEO on stage had Ava's mouth, his jawline, and a stare that could slice through stone. 20 years ago, Theodore made a choice that changed 3 lives. He thought he was protecting her. He thought letting go would keep her safe. But silence didn't save anything. It cost him everything. Now that choice had grown up, walked onto a stage, and taken over an entire empire without knowing the blood that built it. He didn't know Ethan was his son. He didn't know Ethan had her last name. He didn't know what became of the woman he once loved. But the world knew something now. That boy wasn't just a genius. He was the hidden heir. And the moment his name flashed across the screen, Ethan Clark, CEO of eMerge Technologies, everything Theodore's family spent a century building was about to belong to someone they tried to erase. Welcome back to Stories by Mr. Flex, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. This story is about legacy, but not the kind written in wealth. It's about what happens when a man raised to follow power learns too late that love doesn't come with contracts. It's about a woman who refused to let fear raise her child. And it's about a son who built something no one could take, not even the father who never held him. Get ready for a story of pride, pain, and power. Because this is the moment when a billionaire finds out you can silence your feelings. You can sacrifice love, but you can't erase blood. Southwest Atlanta had its own heartbeat. Not the kind you hear through speakers or city sirens, but the kind you felt in your bones, especially on a Saturday morning. Ava moved through it like she was made from the rhythm. The corner of Cascade Road and Benjamin E. Mays was alive. Kids zigzagged on bikes too big for them. Elders leaned under canopies talking politics and peach cobbler, and gospel music poured from car windows like background vocals to the block's regular motion. Ava adjusted her apron and held down her curls as the wind whipped through the open cafe door. She had already clocked in at Bean and Butter before most of the city had finished their first snooze alarm. This was her second job. Her first shift had ended at 6:45 a.m., typing financial reports for a downtown accountant who still couldn't pronounce her name right. Now she was pouring oat milk into cold brew orders, memorizing names, and flipping the register screen with a smile. She didn't need the reminders to stay grounded. Her rent and tuition statements were enough for that. But Ava wasn't bitter. She had goals taped on her bedroom wall, not dreams. Dreams were optional. Her plans weren't. Double espresso, splash of cinnamon, and quiet, she muttered, reading the next mobile order. She glanced at the name. Theo T. She frowned. Most of her customers went by full names or corny pickup lines. When the door opened, she felt the energy shift before she saw him. Tall, clean cut. Not Atlanta clean, Connecticut clean. The kind of man who had never stood in line for fried fish on Friday or shared a sweet tea with an auntie, who knew all your business before you were even born. His suit jacket looked custom, but the shoes gave him away. They weren't new. They were expensive. That was a different kind of confidence. He scanned the room, then walked to the far corner near the brick wall. That booth was always empty. It was right under the faulty vent. She finished the drink and called out, "Theo?" He stood. "That's me," he said, like it surprised him too. Ava brought the cup over and raised a brow. "You sure this ain't too basic for a man dressed like a hedge fund?" He blinked. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. "I prefer precise routines, not flavor experiments." She blinked back. "So, you like your life predictable? Efficient," he replied, pulling out a laptop the color of his tie. Midnight blue, not a scratch on it. Ava nodded slowly but said nothing more. The cafe filled up. A local dance crew passed through for their usual sugar bombs. A deacon from First Missionary flirted with Miss Yvonne at the register. Ava kept her rhythm. Orders, smiles, slight sarcasm, refills, cleanups. But Theo didn't move. Not even when his cup hit empty. He just sat there, occasionally typing, mostly watching the foot traffic. His expression wasn't annoyed, it was curious. He didn't belong here, and that was the first reason Ava decided not to like him. Around noon, Ava brought a refill to his table. He looked up. "I didn't order another." "I know," she said, placing it down. "You look like you need it." He blinked but accepted the drink. "Do I?" She tilted her head. "You keep looking around like you're waiting to be asked to leave." He opened his mouth, then stopped. "Is that obvious to someone who's lived on this block her whole life?" "Yeah." He nodded once. "It's different. That's the best part." Before he could reply, his elbow nudged the table and his drink tipped. The deep brown liquid splashed across his white shirt. He jumped up, cursing under his breath, grabbing a napkin. "Ava?" She laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just one of those honest laughs that slipped out before manners caught it. He stared at her. She blinked. "Sorry, No," he interrupted. "That's the first time someone's laughed at me in a very long time," she shrugged. "Well, welcome to the South. We don't hand out pity, we hand out paper towels." He looked down at the mess, then up at her again. That was the second reason Ava decided maybe, just maybe, she could like him. The stain on his shirt dried like a badge he hadn't expected to wear. Theodore stayed seated longer than planned. His schedule had originally given the cafe 45 minutes, coffee, email check-in, brief call with the expansion team. But 30 minutes had become 90. And the call? Forgotten. Ava moved through her shift with the same grace he had noticed earlier, but now he watched differently. She wasn't just efficient, she was intentional. When an elder walked in, she pulled out a chair for her. When a teenager mumbled a shaky order, Ava made her repeat it proudly, then added extra whipped cream for courage. When a toddler knocked over an entire smoothie, Ava laughed with the mom instead of making her feel small. There was a rhythm to her presence that he couldn't diagram or optimize. It just existed. He wasn't used to things he couldn't explain. By the time the crowd thinned, the vent above his seat let out a wheeze and blew another gust of cold air down his neck. He flinched and shifted his shoulders. "Now you see why nobody sits there," Ava called out without turning. She was wiping the counter with one hand, scribbling a note to the baker with the other. He stood and moved toward the register. "You work the front, manage the flow, clean the tables, and still make fun of your customers?" She glanced up. "Multitasking is a survival skill," he smirked. "You're overqualified for this place," she shrugged. "And you're overdressed. Touché." "I'm Theodore," he said finally, extending a hand. "Ava," she replied, wiping hers before shaking his. Her grip was firm. He glanced around. "Is this your business?" She snorted. "This place? Nah. I'm just passing through, trying to stack enough to open my own firm one day. Consulting? Accounting. For small businesses, especially black-owned ones. Too many of us have hustle, but not enough help with strategy." Theodore raised an eyebrow. That wasn't what he expected to hear, but it made sense. "You ever heard of Eaton Holdings?" he asked. She frowned. "Sounds like a name that charges extra just to breathe near them." He chuckled. "My family runs it. I'm here in Atlanta overseeing a new project, logistics and data systems. Figures," she muttered. "What does? Corporate guys always think Atlanta's just a southern hub with cheap land and fast internet. You see opportunity. We see a city that raised us. You treat it like a deal. We treat it like a heartbeat." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sharp, honest, and Theodore didn't flinch. For once he didn't defend, deflect, or offer a clever counter. He just nodded. "I can respect that." She blinked, slightly surprised. He added, "I may not understand all of it, but I can respect it." Ava folded her arms. "What made you come here for coffee anyway?" "Your hotel probably got a whole marble espresso bar." "I wanted something real," he said simply. She studied him. People say stuff like that when they're chasing an image. But Theodore didn't seem like a man who needed to perform. He looked like someone trying to figure out what real meant. Maybe that's what made her pause before speaking again. "You want something real?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. He nodded. She reached beneath the counter, grabbed a sticky note, and scribbled something down. "Go 2 blocks over to Westview. There's a place called D's Chicken and Cornbread. Ask for Miss Dolores. Order the Sunday plate even if it's Tuesday. Eat that, and then tell me if you still think this cafe is the realest thing you've tasted." He took the note. "Is that an official challenge?" "That's Atlanta hospitality," she said, turning to refill the tip jar. Theodore folded the note and slipped it into his breast pocket. "I'll report back tomorrow." Ava smiled but didn't look at him. "We'll see if you make it past the mac and cheese test." Theodore returned the next day. Ava wasn't surprised. She'd told herself he wouldn't, but something in the way he had folded that sticky note, like it held more than just directions, told her different. She was restocking straws when the door opened. There he was again, same suit, different tie. This time navy with burgundy stripes, still ironed to perfection. Still out of place, but less rigid. He nodded at her from across the room. No smug grin, no smirk, just acknowledgement. "Morning," she called, trying not to sound as curious as she felt. "Sunday plate," he replied, placing a hand over his stomach like he'd been through a full culinary battle. "Miss Dolores almost put me in a coma," Ava laughed. "So, you survived?" "Barely. I had to nap before dinner. That cornbread should come with a warning label. You're welcome." He walked to the corner booth again, now knowing full well it was the coldest seat in the house, and sat like he belonged there. Something shifted in that moment. The air between them wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't professional either. It just was. That rare type of calm where people didn't need to pretend they weren't interested. Ava brought his drink without asking. Same order. "Still want your efficient little routine?" "I'm growing fond of it here," he said, glancing around. "It's noisy, unpredictable, human. You say that like it's a flaw." "No," he said honestly, "like it's something I missed." Ava sat down across from him, surprising even herself. It wasn't policy. She never sat during shift. But this didn't feel like breaking a rule. It felt like making space. "So," she said, "what brings you to Atlanta besides building your empire?" He sipped. "Technically, I'm restructuring a subsidiary. The warehouse and transport team needed overhaul. That's the coldest sentence I've heard all week," she said, grinning. He paused, looked at her. "Would it be warmer if I said I'm trying to do something that actually makes sense for once?" She raised an eyebrow. "I'm not here just because of business," he continued. "I'm here because every board meeting, every award, every flawless quarterly report, it all started feeling like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. I thought maybe this city could remind me what it means to be inside something real." Ava stared at him. He didn't talk like other rich men she'd met. There wasn't a single boast in that sentence. No buzzwords, no power plays. Just a man looking for something. She didn't soften, but she listened deeper. "Well," she said, "this city won't hold your hand, but it might hold up a mirror. That's what I'm afraid of," he admitted. She blinked. There it was again. Honesty. From a man raised to present, not express. The door chimed again. Another customer. Ava stood, nodding once. "Your reflection's gonna depend on how long you stay." She walked off. He watched her go, something tugging at his chest that logic couldn't label. That evening, the cafe closed early for cleaning. Ava stayed back to balance the drawer and wipe down the machines. She didn't expect to see Theodore still at the corner table. "You know we closed 30 minutes ago, right?" she said, not unkindly. He looked up. "I know." "I wasn't ready to leave yet." She tilted her head. "Why not?" He folded his hands. "Because I don't think I've sat still this long without being forced to, and something about this place makes stillness feel safe." She didn't know what to say to that, until she did. "You want dinner?" He blinked. "Here? No. There's a food truck a few blocks up. Shrimp and grits. Way better than overpriced steak." He stood slowly. "Do I need another sticky note for directions?" She laughed. "Nope. This time you're following me." The bathroom light flickered overhead. Not enough to distract her, but enough to annoy her. Ava stood over the sink in her studio apartment just off Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, staring at the white plastic stick like it held a verdict. Actually, it did. 2 lines. Clear. No debate. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't panic. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the test down on the counter next to her peppermint lotion. The mirror reflected her stare, wide, focused but not frightened. Not yet. She wrapped her arms around herself. The room was too quiet. Not even traffic sounds made it through the sealed windows. Just her and the thumping echo of a single thought. He won't be ready. Ava sat on the edge of her bed, breathing slow. She'd always been good at managing chaos. Calculating bills, scheduling work shifts, tutoring on weekends, night classes twice a week. She'd kept her world moving with sheer will and a color-coded wall calendar. But this was new. This wasn't a meeting you could prep for or a shift you could pick up to make it easier. This was life, becoming more than just hers. A tiny laugh escaped her lips. It wasn't joy exactly, but it wasn't fear either. It was the strange, sacred amusement of someone realizing their path had just widened, not by accident, but by reality. She wasn't lost. She wasn't broken. She was pregnant. And somehow that truth felt both heavier and more grounding than anything else in her life had so far. The next afternoon she didn't text him. She didn't call. She waited. Theo walked in at his usual time, 11:43 a.m. Ava knew his habits now. Always slightly early, always in a crisp tie, always with questions that sounded like small talk but held real curiosity underneath. She poured his drink before he ordered it. This time, she added a lemon square to the plate. When she brought it over, he glanced at the dessert and raised a brow. "No challenge today?" he asked. "I have something to say," she replied, sitting down across from him before he could respond. He tilted his head, cautious but calm. She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Silence. That cold vent above their booth gave a familiar hiss, but he didn't move. No flinch, no smile, no panic, just stillness. His eyes locked on hers, and for a second she saw something flicker there. Concern, calculation, confusion, but not cruelty. He opened his mouth, closed it, took a breath. "Okay," he said finally, quietly. Ava waited. He said nothing more. "Okay," she repeated, her voice sharper now. "That's what you have." "I need a moment," he said. "No," she cut in. "You've had moments, days, weeks. I knew after the second missed cycle. I waited because I wanted to believe you'd be the kind of man who wouldn't shut down when it got inconvenient." He stared at her. "I'm not asking you to raise a child today," she continued. "I'm telling you that I am, and I needed to know what part, if any, you'd want to play." He leaned back in the booth. His hand ran down his tie. Still no answer. She stood up. "That silence," she said. "It speaks louder than anything." She turned and walked away. Theo sat there, cup untouched, eyes fixed on the lemon square. The condensation on the glass had already started to fade. He didn't chase her. Theodore didn't leave the cafe right away. He stayed in that cold corner booth long after Ava walked out, staring at the empty seat she had left behind. Her words cut through him sharper than he expected. Not because they were harsh, but because they were honest. He wasn't used to honesty hitting like that. He wasn't used to someone expecting something real from him. He wasn't used to being afraid, and fear, silent, heavy, uninvited, wrapped around his ribs like a grip he didn't know how to loosen. He finally stood, gathered his belongings, and left the shop without finishing his drink. The city outside felt louder, hotter, too alive. He moved through the streets like a man trying to outrun the truth that had finally caught him. By the time he reached his temporary office overlooking downtown Atlanta, he had rehearsed a dozen possible conversations, none of which made sense. His phone buzzed. A name he knew well appeared. "Father," he answered. "Yes, we need to talk," the voice said. Stern, polished, precise. The same tone Theodore had grown up with, the same tone that left no room for softness. "Your quarterly report was reviewed." "I don't like what I'm seeing." Theodore closed the office door. "This isn't about reports, it is about everything," his father snapped. "You're distracted. A man in your position cannot afford distraction." Theodore leaned against the desk. "I'm handling it." "No," his father said sharply. "You're losing focus, and I know why." Theodore froze. His father continued calmly. "A woman, a local, a problem that needs to be removed before it affects your standing." The muscles in his jaw tightened. "She is not a problem." His father ignored the correction. "You have responsibilities, legacy, contracts. The board expects clean lines, not emotional chaos." For a second, Theodore saw Ava's face, hurt, disappointed, strong enough to walk away because he couldn't speak. His father said, "End this distraction, now, or I will make sure your inheritance is reassigned. Theodore closed his eyes. This is not negotiable, his father added. Erase it or step aside. The call ended. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calm. It was pressure. Years of conditioning slammed into him at once. Every etiquette lesson, every boardroom warning, every reminder that emotions were liabilities, not truths. Every childhood moment where softness was treated like a flaw. He wasn't choosing between Ava and ego. He was choosing between Ava and the only identity he had ever been allowed to have. And he made the wrong choice. Later that night, he drove to the corporate law office that handled family contracts. The lights were low, but the receptionist recognized him immediately. Within minutes, a familiar folder was placed in front of him, a separation document, a legal declaration freeing him from family obligations, allowing him independence, but at a cost. Signing it meant choosing autonomy over obedience. Signing it meant freedom, but a freedom he didn't understand yet. He held the pen for a long time. Then he signed, but he didn't tell Ava. He convinced himself that stepping back would protect her, that removing himself from his father's reach would shield her from corporate consequences. But the next morning, when he walked into the cafe, she wasn't there. He checked the schedule posted near the door. Her name was gone. He paced the floor, asked the manager, asked the baker. No one knew where she went. She hadn't left a forwarding number or note. She hadn't taken a final shift. She had simply vanished. Ava had walked away the moment she realized he couldn't stand with her, and she wasn't the type to return to a place that broke her heart. Theodore sat down in the same cold booth, the vent brushing his shoulder. For the first time, it wasn't the air that chilled him. It was the realization that silence had cost him something he didn't know how to fix. He had signed a document to free himself from a legacy. But he had lost a future he never got the chance to fight for. The delivery room was quiet. Not the cold clinical silence Theodore would have known. This was a stillness filled with presence. Nurses moving gently, a monitor rhythm steady and clear, a tired but focused midwife placing a tiny wrapped form into Ava's arms. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since she left the cafe weeks ago. But now, holding this small body that had no clue about the storm that brought him here, Ava felt something bigger than sadness, bigger than anger, something almost holy. "Welcome," she whispered. His eyes were closed, his fists tight. He had her skin tone, her full lips. But that jaw, that stare, even in sleep, she could already tell. Theodore would see himself in this child, if he ever looked close enough. The nurse asked, "Have you chosen a name?" Ava nodded. "Ethan." It rolled out of her mouth like she'd been saving it for this exact moment. She'd grown up reading Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks, but there was something about Ethan, the poet, the thinker, whose work held both logic and passion. That balance spoke to her, and somehow it felt right. This boy, born from two people who couldn't find balance, would carry a name rooted in both sharpness and soul. The next few months were a blur of exhaustion and milestones. Ava moved into a small one-bedroom rental on the southwest edge of the city, not far from where she grew up. Her aunt helped with diapers. Her best friend from high school dropped off groceries. Her church sent gift cards and casseroles in bulk. She didn't have much, but she had people, and that made the difference. She worked part-time from home, crunching numbers for small business owners who needed help organizing their books. She studied during nap time. She printed out flyers with her name and rate card and walked them into barber shops, salons, food trucks, and daycares. Word spread. Miss Ava, who balanced her baby on one hip and QuickBooks on the other. Reliable, affordable, brilliant. Clients called her the spreadsheet whisperer. She never said out loud how much she missed the version of herself who used to dream without flinching. But every time Ethan cooed when she entered the room, every time he fell asleep against her chest, every time he giggled from the sound of her keys tapping against a calculator, Ava felt grounded again. Ethan grew fast. At 4, he corrected his babysitter's math during a game of Monopoly. At 6, he asked why some companies didn't invest in smaller neighborhoods when those areas had the highest potential growth margins. At 8, he told Ava he wanted to build something that made people's lives easier, not just richer. She didn't blink. She just smiled and said, "Then you better eat your vegetables and finish your homework." He did both. There were no science camps or elite academies in their world. Just library cards, second-hand coding books, and a worn-out laptop that Ava rebuilt twice with help from a neighbor who fixed electronics for side cash. By 10, Ethan had created a digital filing system for his mom's clients, organized by income level, tax category, and audit risk. She didn't know what to say, so she cooked his favorite meal that night, baked salmon with honey cornbread, and told him he could sleep in the next morning. He didn't. He was up at sunrise, because that's how his mind worked. He didn't just inherit Ava's fire or Theodore's logic. He inherited both and wielded them without even knowing it. Ava never spoke Theodore's name. She never told Ethan he was unwanted. She never painted him as a villain, but she also never lied. When Ethan once asked if his father was around, Ava looked him straight in the eye and said, "He's not, but you are, and that's more than enough for me." Ethan nodded, as if the answer didn't bother him, but he never asked again. Instead, he focused on the world in front of him. One code line, one challenge, one idea at a time. And Ava? She continued building a life that wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and full of laughter, and one day would be the foundation for a future none of them could have predicted. The sound of keys hitting the desk echoed through the room like punctuation at the end of a long week. Ava rolled her shoulders and leaned back in the office chair she'd rescued from a Craigslist ad 4 years earlier. Her accounting firm, once a dream she'd scribbled in the back of a journal while holding a newborn, had grown into a quiet force. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't funded by big investors or featured in magazines, but it was effective. She ran her books, paid her employees fair, and consulted with startup founders across Atlanta who didn't have uncles on bank boards or cousins in Congress. Her client list was built word of mouth, one corner shop and cleaning service at a time. Most of them were black-owned, many of them were women-owned, and all of them, in Ava's words, were on the edge of brilliance, just need the right numbers behind them. The small office off Metropolitan Parkway was nothing fancy. A front room with a couch, a back room with 2 desks, a kitchenette stocked with herbal tea and leftover birthday cake from her assistant's twin daughters. But to Ava, it was a fortress, one built from perseverance. She looked out the window and smiled. Ethan was sitting on the bench outside, knees pulled up, hoodie over his curls, nose buried in a tablet. 12 years old, and already running circles around some of her clients in terms of problem solving. He'd rebuilt her invoicing system last spring and added a customer-facing dashboard that impressed a tech founder from Buckhead. Last week, he created a budgeting app designed specifically for freelance stylists. The boy was built different, but more than talent, it was the focus that stunned her. Ava would catch him deep in thought at the breakfast table, sketching out flowcharts in the corner of his workbook, or asking questions like, "What if companies paid you for accuracy instead of time?" She saw it, the sharpness in his eyes, the steady way he processed information, the curiosity that came with no need to impress, only to understand. And sometimes, when she wasn't looking at him as a mother, she saw it too clearly. That stare, that jawline, the way he blinked twice when he was trying to hide how much something moved him. He was so much like him, the man she never spoke of, the man Ethan had never asked about again. Later that evening, Ava sat on the living room rug, sorting receipts from a new client who ran a food truck and hadn't filed taxes in 3 years. Ethan was across the room working on a design for a school competition, something about creating tech to support community safety. He kept pausing, staring into space, then typing rapidly. "You good, baby?" she asked without looking up. "Just thinking," he mumbled. She smiled. That was as usual. It was quiet again. The air between them wasn't heavy, just full, the kind of quiet only families with deep trust could keep without needing to fill. As she sorted folders alphabetically, Ava's fingers landed on one she didn't recognize. Pale green, no label. Sandwiched between 2 tax files from 2016, she opened it slowly. Inside, business cards, outdated contracts, and a single envelope stamped with an old law firm seal. Her heart slowed. She pulled it out, flipped it over, and saw it. Theodore Carter, Family Holdings, separation contract. Her throat tightened. It wasn't a breakup letter. It wasn't addressed to her. But it told a story she had never known. He hadn't just walked away. He had signed a legal severance from his family, from their wealth, from everything he had been groomed to inherit. And he had done it right around the time she told him she was pregnant. She stared at the paper, the date, the seal, the final signature. It hit her in waves, not just the pain of what happened, but the truth that she never knew. All these years, and he never said a word. Ava sat frozen, her fingers clutching the edges of the envelope as if letting go would make it vanish. The ink on the document had faded slightly, but the stamp from Eaton Holdings' legal division was still clear. There was no mistaking what this was, no denying who it belonged to. Separation from family trust and financial legacy. Signed by Theodore Carter. Dated 2 weeks after she had told him about the pregnancy. She read it once, then twice, then again. Each line cut deeper than the last, not because they were cruel, but because they confirmed something she had never been allowed to understand. The man she thought walked away to protect himself had tried to walk away to protect them, but he never told her, he never explained, he never called, he never followed up. He just disappeared from her life while she built a new one from scratch. And now, 12 years later, the proof of his intent sat in her lap like an echo of a life that might have been. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from grief. She had let go of love, she had let go of his silence, she had forgiven the absence, but what she had never accounted for was that he might have tried, not enough, not the right way, but still, he hadn't simply vanished without care. That changed everything, and yet it changed nothing. She laid the document on her kitchen table and stared at it while Ethan finished brushing his teeth down the hall. She could hear him humming as he moved through their evening routine. Same rhythm every night. Homework, dinner, dishes, 1 hour of tech time, brush, prayer, bed. He was easy to raise, not because life was easy, but because he knew how to make order from chaos. Just like his father. The thought stung. She hated that it still mattered. She dropped her face into her hands. It wasn't just about Theodore. It was about the woman she used to be, the one who'd hoped that telling him about the pregnancy would lead to something more, not less. She remembered the way he stared at her in that cafe, the way his silence felt heavy, not careless, the way she walked away because she refused to wait on a man who didn't know how to choose. But what if he had chosen, just not her? What if he chose the fight, just didn't know how to tell her? Her chest tightened. It was easier when the pain had been clear. Easy to hate the absence, easy to forget the softness. Now she had to confront the complication, and complications hurt more than clean endings. Later that night, once Ethan had gone to bed, Ava folded the document carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't shred it, she didn't burn it. She just put it in a drawer next to her oldest journals, birth certificates, tax returns, things that shaped her story, even when they never made sense. She stood by the sink sipping water, watching the lights flicker from a passing car outside, letting the stillness settle in. Her body was here, but her thoughts were back at that cafe booth, back in front of a man who never said what she needed to hear. Her face was calm, but inside, something was breaking all over again. Because the worst part wasn't that he didn't fight harder. The worst part was that maybe he had, and she never knew. The pen hovered over the page longer than it needed to. Ava sat at her desk, the light from the small lamp casting a soft glow across the half-written sheet of paper. Not a digital note, not an email draft, a letter, one she would never send, but somehow she needed to write it. Dear Theodore, I never thought I'd write you anything again. Not a message, not a thought, not even a breath. But today I saw something I was never supposed to see. Severing yourself from the very family that once made you choose between power and peace. And somehow that makes this harder, because I thought I had closure. I told myself you were just another man who chose comfort over courage, another name I'd tuck behind my ambition and raise my son without. But you weren't that simple. And I wasn't that naive. You were scared, and I was impatient, and maybe, just maybe, we were both doing what we thought would hurt less. But here we are, 12 years later, and hurt is still in the room. Ava stopped. She blinked, feeling the heat behind her eyes. She hadn't cried in years over Theodore. Not once since the early newborn days when silence was louder than screams. She exhaled, steady and long. She continued writing. Ethan's doing well. You'd be proud of him. Though he doesn't know you. And he doesn't need to. He's got my fire, your mind, his own direction, and I hope, wherever you are, you're building something worthy of what you left behind. Because I did. I built a boy who knows how to lead with both hands, one for business, one for people. I built a life that didn't fold when you disappeared. But I didn't erase you. You are in his laugh when he gets an idea, in his silence when something bothers him, in his questions when the answers come too easy. He's not waiting for a father, but I wonder if you're waiting for a second chance. She stared at the letter. No signature, no address, just the raw honesty of a woman who didn't need to be heard to feel complete. She folded the page in half, then again, and slid it into a manila folder marked Do Not File. She tucked it in the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath old utility bills and a handwritten list of Ethan's first words. It would stay there, not for him, for her. A reminder that letting go didn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it meant acknowledging the truth without needing to act on it. Across the living room, Ethan sat on the floor with a legal pad, his brow furrowed, eyes locked on a cluster of hand-drawn charts. He was in a zone. Ava walked over quietly and watched from the doorway. The sketches weren't just ideas. They were blueprints, something to do with logistics, systems, and automated routing, not for trucks, but for neighborhood resources. Ethan had told her a week ago, I think we can help local businesses deliver faster if they team up and share drivers. It's not about owning fleets. It's about being smart with what's already there. She'd nodded, only half understanding. Now she saw it was more than just a bright idea. It was the beginning of something. He didn't know it yet, but she could feel it. Whatever Ethan was building wasn't just for school. It wasn't just for play. It was purpose. The same thing she had tried to protect all those years ago. The same thing Theodore might have tried to save, in his own broken way. She stood quietly and let her eyes rest on her son. Knees crossed, fingers smudged with ink, voice softly humming to himself as he calculated the next line. He didn't ask questions about his father. He never brought up the name. But in moments like this, Ava didn't have to wonder whether he'd inherited more than just features. He had. And one day, the world was going to see it. Just like she did now. 18. That's how old Ethan was when his idea stopped being a sketch and became something real. Not even something Ava could fully explain to her peers. But real, functional, funded, legal. He called it eMerge, a logistics tech platform built to help community businesses deliver smarter, faster, and together. Not by replacing drivers or scaling too fast, but by organizing existing infrastructure. Food trucks, beauty supply stores, bookstores, mom-and-pop dry cleaners, all supported with back-end automation that routed deliveries and pickups based on proximity, capacity, and timing. In other words, he found a way to make neighbors work together like Fortune 500 companies. He wore sweats and hoodies while coding, sat cross-legged on the living room floor while sketching interfaces, held late-night video calls with small vendors and local engineers. His startup didn't begin in a boardroom. It started in a shared kitchen. Ava watched the whole thing bloom in front of her. At first, she offered advice, taxes, business structure, how to protect his intellectual property. But Ethan didn't just listen. He implemented, fast. By the time his friends were applying for dorm rooms, Ethan had already secured his business license, signed 3 pilot clients, and built a beta version of the app that connected 5 stores in Southwest Atlanta. "You're really doing this," Ava said one evening as she passed him a plate of fried catfish and roasted broccoli. Ethan looked up from his tablet and smiled. "You always said build for your block first." She smirked. "I meant spreadsheets." He grinned. "Same principle." She sat beside him, letting the moment land. He was focused, but never arrogant. Young, but not naive. There was no front in his hustle. No inflated vision boards or clout-chasing slogans, just clarity. And that scared her, not because she doubted him, but because she knew what it meant to move against the giants. The local press noticed first. A brief article in a community newsletter spotlighted a teen innovator building smart delivery systems with a heart for local business. That got picked up by an Atlanta business blog, which led to a quick video interview shot in Ava's backyard. That video hit 6,000 views in 2 days. By the end of the week, Ethan had emails from investors. He didn't answer them, not yet. He was still scaling quietly, testing routes, adjusting code, learning from feedback. He cared more about whether Ms. Rhonda's floral shop got her orders delivered on time than impressing tech circles. Ava saw it all. Every milestone, every bug fix, every long night. She never said it, but she felt it. This wasn't a project. This was a mission. And Ethan was building something his father never had. Not just a company, but community power. One morning, while washing dishes, Ava caught a glimpse of him outside the window. He was sitting under the pecan tree, hoodie over his head, on a video call with a nonprofit co-op. He was listening, nodding, sketching, still that same boy who used to diagram delivery routes on his cereal boxes. Still hers, but no longer small. By month's end, Ethan launched eMerge publicly. Local businesses signed up in clusters, drivers submitted applications to partner, and one tech podcast picked up the story. Meet the 18-year-old revolutionizing last-mile delivery without breaking communities. Ava kept the audio, not for the headline, but for the way Ethan sounded. Clear, measured, focused, like a young man who knew what he wanted to build and why. What he didn't know was that miles away, in a different high-rise with cold glass windows and gold-lettered business cards, someone would soon hear the name eMerge in a very different tone. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. For now, the genius in a hoodie was just getting started. It started small, just a few missed projections. The quarterly shipping numbers dipped slightly below expectations. Warehouse wait times increased in 2 regional hubs. Drivers complained about route inefficiencies. A client contract up for renewal didn't come back signed. But Eton Logistics had weathered worse. Theodore reviewed the reports in his Manhattan office without concern. His suit pressed, his tie symmetrical, his schedule tightly mapped. He didn't panic over minor blips. The family business had been standing for nearly a century, built by generations of men who valued structure, discretion, and discipline. That's why he didn't see it coming, because this time the numbers weren't lying. They were whispering, and the whispers were turning into patterns. By the time the fiscal year wrapped, whispers turned into questions. Why are we losing regional clients in Atlanta? Why are smaller businesses not renewing their service contracts? Why is our fleet running at 83% capacity in a market we used to dominate? Theodore's board meetings grew tenser. He sat at the head of the table, listening with arms crossed and jaw firm. One of the newer board members, a young executive from their West Coast expansion team, brought up a slide in the quarterly deck. We traced most of the client exits back to a platform gaining traction in the Atlanta metro area. The slide clicked forward, a name Theodore had never seen before. He squinted slightly, then leaned in. The bullet points were clean. Community-centered logistics coordination, adaptive routing based on local density and proximity, high retention from small to mid-sized retail businesses, tech forward without infrastructure overbuild, black-owned and youth-led. He cleared his throat. How long has this company been in operation? Publicly? About 9 months, the analyst replied. But the founder had beta testing running before that. Seems like it started with a few businesses in southwest Atlanta, and we're just now hearing about it. We're not losing enterprise clients, the analyst added quickly, yet, but the presence is growing, especially among vendors and partners that value relationships and community responsiveness. Their onboarding model is friendlier, more flexible. Another board member frowned. So we're getting outplayed by an app? Theodore didn't flinch, but something in his chest shifted. He clicked through the next slide, a screenshot of the app interface, side by side with testimonials from clients who'd left Eton. One quote stood out. They know our names, they know our streets. We're not just stops on a map anymore. Theodore set the remote down. Schedule a private review with the strategy team. I want a report on every region where this company is active. I want client loss data, timeline overlays, vendor migration summaries. All of it, someone muttered. It's probably just another trend. But Theodore didn't answer. He stared at the screen. eMerge, short name, clean font, purpose-driven branding. It didn't smell like a trend. It felt like something built from necessity, and he knew from experience, necessity had teeth. Later that evening, Theodore sat alone in his penthouse, reviewing the client exit logs. The names were familiar, small businesses. Some of them had signed on during his first year leading regional operations in the South. a few he had met in person during expansion efforts. All gone, all now tied to this newcomer platform. He rubbed his temples. He wasn't angry, he was intrigued. The patterns weren't accidental. They were intentional, efficient, precise. He recognized the code beneath the chaos. Whoever was behind this wasn't chasing clout or headlines. They were chasing effectiveness, loyalty, long-term ecosystem control. That didn't come from investors or marketing. That came from understanding systems and people. It came from vision. And Theodore, more than anyone, respected vision, especially the kind that came from the ground up. He closed the laptop and looked out at the skyline. Atlanta was flickering below, distant and alive, a city he hadn't walked through in years. Something told him he'd be returning soon, not for business, for answers. The plane touched down just after 3 p.m. Theodore stepped onto Atlanta soil for the first time in years, but the airport looked nothing like he remembered. The terminals had expanded, the walkways were sleeker, and the city's pulse felt louder, like it had grown without waiting for his return. His driver waited curbside in a black SUV, doors already open, itinerary in hand. But Theodore didn't glance at the schedule. Instead, he rolled down the window as they turned off Camp Creek Parkway and onto the freeway. He wanted to see the city, feel it. The glass towers, murals of local legends, corner shops pressed up against new condo builds. Atlanta was still rising, not with noise but with intent. Halfway into the drive, traffic slowed on the connector. That's when he saw it. A billboard, big, bold, clean, emerge, built for the people, delivered with purpose. Underneath the slogan was a face, young, confident, focused. His curls trimmed neatly, hoodie zipped halfway, gaze sharp but unpretentious. Theodore narrowed his eyes. Something about that face. It didn't scream branding. It didn't scream startup hype. It stared back. There was a familiar pull in the jawline, the cheekbones. Even the posture in the photo. The driver nudged his shoulder. "You all right, sir?" Theodore nodded slowly, eyes still locked on the billboard. "Who's that?" "Ethan Clark, tech kid, running circles around half the companies in the region. Word is he built that platform from scratch with no outside money. All local backing." The name echoed through Theodore's mind like an old song he couldn't place. Clark, he repeated softly. The last name meant nothing to him. But that face, there was something in it, something unfinished. The SUV pulled off near Midtown. The billboard vanished behind them, but the image stayed in Theodore's thoughts, not like a mystery, but like a memory he hadn't made yet. A few blocks away, Ava sat outside a small cafe in West End. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't typing. She had seen the billboard, too. Not today, last week. She saw it while taking a shortcut home after a site visit with a client. Her car had slowed just enough to give her a clear, uninterrupted view of her son's face lit up over the city skyline. She hadn't told Ethan. He didn't need that pressure. He didn't need to know how many people were watching now. He was focused on the work, and she wouldn't let the noise shift his vision. But she felt it. That billboard wasn't just a milestone. It was a signal. Something was coming. Ava's phone buzzed on the table. It was Ethan. Board meeting over, going smooth. Heading to Southside office now. She smiled and texted back. Proud of you. Be safe. She set the phone down, then looked out across the street, and froze. There, exiting a hotel lobby across from the cafe, wearing a gray jacket and that same familiar stillness in his walk, was Theodore. He hadn't seen her. He was moving fast, head down, probably chasing the next meeting or appointment. But for Ava, time halted. It had been over a decade. She hadn't said his name aloud in 12 years. Now here he was, in the same city under the same sky, breathing the same air her son walked through daily. She just watched him disappear around the corner. Her chest rose slowly, not with panic, not with fear, with certainty. The past had stepped back into the frame, whether she was ready or not, and he didn't even know what waited for him. Not yet. But soon. The ballroom buzzed with the sound of capital, laughter coded in strategy, handshakes measured in percentages, eyes scanning name badges before faces. The Southeastern Tech and Trade Summit had drawn executives, founders, and venture sharks from every corner of the region. Theodore walked in without announcement. His suit was charcoal gray, subtle but sharp, the kind that signaled power without noise. He was greeted with nods, a few murmured greetings, a handshake here and there. But he wasn't here to be seen. He was here to find out who was winning, and why. The main stage sat beneath a 12-foot LED screen, flanked by sleek uplighting and soft instrumentals. A rotating slide deck cycled through scheduled speakers. Keynote, Ethan Clark, Emerge Technologies topic, from local to legacy, building what we weren't given. Theodore froze. There it was again, that name, that company. His grip tightened around the event folder in his hand. He walked toward the main stage area without sitting, choosing to stand near the side aisle. Half-shadowed, unreadable. The stage lights dimmed. A host walked out, mic in hand. Our next speaker needs no long intro. You've seen the headlines, you've seen the partnerships, you've seen the impact. But what you may not know is why it works. A pause, smile. Please welcome, Ethan Clark. Applause rose, genuine and enthusiastic. Not industry polite, but earned. Then he stepped out. Hoodie, blazer, black jeans. He didn't wave. He didn't posture. He just adjusted the mic and looked out at the crowd. Theodore's breath hitched in his throat. He had already seen the face on the billboard, but something about seeing Ethan in motion, alive, commanding, present, snapped something loose inside him. He saw it now, undeniably. The way his eyes held still when he made a point, the subtle pause before finishing a sentence. This wasn't coincidence. This was blood. I didn't build Emerge to compete with legacy systems. I built it because legacy systems didn't serve people who looked like me, lived like me, or came from where I came from. The room fell still. I didn't inherit a network. I inherited necessity. I saw how brilliant our communities were, but how often we got boxed out of efficiency. So I built a bridge, not a platform, not an empire. A bridge. Slides clicked behind him, showcasing maps, impact stats, faces of partnered drivers and small business owners. We weren't waiting for tech to save us. We were saving each other. I just made it faster. Theodore didn't blink. Every word pierced. This wasn't just a competitor. This was his son. His jaw clenched, but his eyes never left the stage. Ethan closed his keynote with a line that made the room lean in. We don't chase power. We redesign access. He stepped back from the podium as the crowd erupted in applause. Theodore remained still, not from shock, but from restraint. His heart beat in places it hadn't touched in years. Not guilt, not pride, something deeper. The ache of a truth arriving too late to undo what was done. He didn't move. Not yet. A few rows back, near the corner entrance, Ava stood. She had come quietly, not to be seen, but to see. And when her eyes landed on Theodore's figure by the wall, frozen, visibly trembling, she knew. He knew. No one said a word. No one needed to. In that echoing silence between keynote and chaos, Theodore Carter, the man who once froze in a cafe booth and walked away from the best part of himself, now stood before the world, watching his son become everything he wasn't allowed to be. The conference floor hadn't fully settled from Ethan's keynote when the lights dimmed again. People leaned in, some whispered. A few glanced toward the stage with curiosity, expecting a closing message or a sponsor announcement. But instead, a different slide deck emerged. Black background, white lettering, bold, clean, Emerge strategic acquisition announcement. There was a moment of hesitation across the room. Whispers turned into quiet. Ethan walked back on stage, no note cards, no moderator, just a calm presence and one hand tucked in his jacket pocket. His voice was steady. Emerge has always stood for one thing, reshaping access, not just to technology, but to economic positioning. And in that spirit, we've reached a new chapter. A map of the Southeast appeared behind him, highlighting warehouse zones, transport routes, and logistics centers. The communities we serve have outgrown the systems designed to move around them. He clicked once more. Today, I'm proud to announce Emerge has acquired one of the largest regional logistics networks in the southeastern corridor. Gasps scattered through the ballroom. Some reached for their phones. Some straightened in their chairs. Ethan didn't flinch. Our acquisition includes warehouses, transport hubs, and delivery routing infrastructure previously owned by A pause. Hartwell Freight and Distribution. The name dropped like thunder. Even Theodore, with all his composure and years of boardroom control, couldn't stop the way his body stiffened. Hartwell was one of Eaton's core competitors, family-owned, aggressive, and publicly entangled in several of Eaton's shared contracts. If Hartwell was now under Emerge, that changed everything. Eaton's regional grip would weaken, their eastern routing corridor would be fractured, and worse, the shift wouldn't just be financial, it would be symbolic. The old guard being overtaken not by flash or scandal, but by efficiency, by vision, by a name the board had dismissed as another tech experiment. Ava watched from the side of the room. She didn't look at the slide. She didn't react to the announcement. She didn't even blink at the headlines forming in the air around her. She was watching him, Theodore, his body still, his gaze locked on the stage. No anger, no pride, just realization. He was staring not just at a business shift. He was staring at a legacy he never got to shape. Ethan wrapped up quickly. No gloating, no dramatic finish. Just a nod of gratitude, a brief thank you to partners and staff, and then he exited stage left with the same calm he'd entered with. As the room exploded into buzz, speculation, and strategy whispers, Theodore remained in place. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say, not in private, not in public, not even to himself. He turned slowly and finally saw her. Ava standing across the ballroom, arms crossed gently, her expression unreadable, their eyes locked. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, hadn't shared space since that cafe booth, since that long pause that split their lives into before and after. Now, with hundreds of strangers swirling around them, they stood still in the eye of a storm they had both helped create, whether they meant to or not. He didn't move. Neither did she, but something passed between them, not rage, not closure, not even forgiveness yet, just truth, an acknowledgement of what was, of what wasn't, of what had become. The crowd grew louder, cameras flashed, screens refreshed, industry analysts already posting predictions and reaction articles, but none of that mattered, not to them, because somewhere in this very building their son, Ethan, had just made history, without their help, without their permission, and without ever knowing the full story that lived behind his name. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, not silent, but calmer. You could breathe out here. Theodore stood near the side corridor, waiting. His posture wasn't stiff anymore. His tie was slightly loosened, jacket unbuttoned, eyes steady, but different. Not scanning, not calculating, just waiting. He didn't know what he'd say. He had rehearsed lines on the flight over. None of them fit anymore. What could he possibly say to a young man who had just done what entire corporations couldn't? What could he offer a son he'd never held? Ethan walked out of the press room, still clutching a folded copy of the acquisition summary. He was mid-conversation with one of his advisors, but paused when he saw the man standing down the hall. At first, he didn't recognize him. Then something clicked, not in his memory but in his reflection, the stillness in the stance. It was like looking at an older version of a photo he'd never taken. Theodore stepped forward, slowly, carefully. He didn't reach for a handshake. He didn't lead with his name. He just said, "Congratulations. You did something remarkable." Ethan blinked once, then replied, "Thank you." No hostility, no warmth, just space. The kind of space filled with possibility and history, both waiting to be acknowledged. Theodore looked down. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to say anything, or be here." "You weren't invited," Ethan said calmly. The words weren't cruel, just honest. Theodore nodded. "That's fair." They stood there, 2 generations shaped by silence, each carrying a version of the past that the other never got to explain. Theodore exhaled. "I saw your keynote. You speak with clarity, purpose." "I had a good teacher," Ethan replied. Theodore tilted his head, puzzled. "My mother," Ethan clarified. "She taught me how to stand on my own, and how to stand for something." Theodore's chest tightened. "I believe that." The pause between them stretched. Then Ethan asked, "Why now?" It wasn't accusatory, it wasn't angry, just necessary. Theodore hesitated, then answered, "Because it took me this long to realize silence doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the damage." He swallowed. "I thought I was making the right decision back then, that pulling away would keep your mother safe, that staying quiet was smarter than exposing her to what my family would have done." Ethan didn't flinch. "But you left," he said. Without a word, Theodore nodded. "I did, and that wasn't your family, that was you." Another nod. That was all Ethan needed. Accountability, not excuses. Footsteps approached from behind. She didn't speak at first, she just joined them, standing between them, not in defense, but in balance. Ethan glanced at her. She gave him the smallest nod. He stayed. Theodore looked at her with something between sorrow and awe. "I saw you at the summit," he said. "I didn't know what to say." "You didn't have to," she replied. Their eyes held longer this time. Not to fight, not to fix, just to understand. "I found the document," she said. "Years later. I know now. What you signed. I'm sorry I walked away without asking why," she said. "But I had to." He nodded. "I know. That was it. That was all the apology either of them could give, and all the forgiveness they were willing to offer. Not as a couple, not as enemies, but as two people who once held something sacred and dropped it." Ethan stepped back slightly, watching them both. "Whatever happened back then," he said, "I'm not here to judge it, but I needed to understand it." "You deserve that," Ava said softly. Theodore added, "And if there's any way I can support what you're building." Ethan held up a hand. "I didn't build it to be supported," he said. "I built it to exist, even if no one ever clapped for it." Theodore smiled faintly. "Then you built something stronger than legacy. You built conviction." Ethan didn't smile back, but he nodded. Respect, earned, not inherited. The three stood there, not as a family in the traditional sense, but as individuals who shared something no stock transfer, no press release, no apology could rewrite. Truth. And truth, finally faced, was enough. Outside, the conference buzzed with speculation. Inside, three lives stood still, not to dwell but to breathe. Not in reunion, not in regret, but in quiet, complicated, beautiful reckoning.